The story begins immediately with a tragedy. The image is terrifying as we see a house consumed by flames and a little girl playing in the garden. The father crawls out of the house, screaming. The girl runs toward the house and tells her mother about the fire. Margaret, their neighbor, rushes out as Todd asks her to call the fire department. She does so immediately, answering the questions anxiously while watching the flames devour the house, telling them to hurry because there are babies inside. Meanwhile, Todd pushes his car away from the fire. Todd manages to break one of the windows, but this causes an explosion that feeds the fire even more, making it impossible for Todd to go in to rescue his daughters. In despair, he throws himself on the ground and begins to beg a higher power to save his daughters while fire sirens sound in the background. Police investigators begin to collect data, examine the scene, question witnesses, and analyze the scarce evidence left after the incident. In a very religious town, Todd's preferences become a problem. He's a sick person. They become increasingly convinced that Todd is the culprit, believing he deliberately started the fire while his children were sleeping. Todd and his wife Stacy are taken to the police station for questioning. They're asked an extensive series of questions, ranging from what happened the night before to previous problems in their relationship. Given that Todd has had problems in the past, investigators begin to doubt him and ask him to recount the events. What happened the day before? Todd recounts everything that happened that day, but the investigators seem skeptical. Stacy seems to be afraid of him, or at least is disgusted with him because of previous infidelities and his alcohol abuse. That night, Stacy took a double shift and left the pending argument, not knowing it would be the last night she would see her daughters. In Todd's version, his girls were already on fire when he got to them, and this time it's true, yes sir. After his daughter's funeral, Todd and Stacy have a heated argument on their way home. Pull the car over, I want to get out of the car, pull the car over. Finally, the police stop them, and Todd is arrested for the murder of his 3 little girls. Todd Wellingham, you're under arrest for homicide. What should have been a period of mourning quickly turns into an interrogation. Investigators analyze the remains and conclude that the fire was not accidental but intentional. The burn marks, the patterns in the debris, and the way the flames spread indicate the use of an accelerant, and there is only one culprit to point to: Todd. Before he can fully grasp the situation, he is arrested and charged with murdering his own daughters. I didn't do it, Martin. Todd is stunned by what is happening, unable to comprehend how his life has transformed into this nightmare. The anger and fear intensify within him until tensions erupt in a heated altercation with his cellmate. His lawyers reveal a harsh reality to him, advising him to plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence. However, Todd refuses to accept. He proclaims his innocence and is not willing to admit to a crime he did not commit. His lawyer loses his patience as he sees no way to win the case. He opposes Todd testifying, convinced that his bad temper will only cause more problems. He continues to insist that confessing is his only chance to survive. Todd's trial is swift and relentless. The prosecution presents him as a violent and problematic man who set his own house on fire in a fit of rage. Now I want you to imagine these little angels burning in their beds. It wasn't a simple incident, it was a homicide. The prosecutor shows the jury photographs of the 3 girls who lost their lives in the fire. Margaret, who contacted emergency services, testifies against him, stating that Todd did not try to save the children until the officers arrived. He was only worried about his car. He didn't try to save the girls until the police arrived. The prosecution presents forensic experts who argue that the fire was intentional, emphasizing the burn marks and melted floor as evidence of accelerant use. The final nail in Todd's coffin is the testimony of Johnny, who claims to have heard him talking to himself in his cell and admitting to starting the fire to kill his daughters. Although the veracity of this is questionable, the jury wants to convict him for what he did, and the decision comes quickly. Todd's defense is insufficient, and his past fights along with his problems with authority condemn him. He almost beat me to death. In the whole town, there's no one with a more extensive record of violence. The courtroom does not seek the truth. It only longs for closure. Todd is found guilty of murder and sentenced to death by order of the state of Texas. You are sentenced to death. Todd is taken to a high-security prison where he will spend his days until his sentence is executed. Everyone around him, prisoners and guards, is convinced of his guilt and wants to beat him up. Over time, Todd's life in prison becomes even more brutal when tensions arise with other inmates, and Todd, outnumbered, receives a beating before the guards manage to intervene. Each blow leaves him more shattered. His body suffers and his spirit breaks, but the torture is not over. With no one to turn to and no way to defend himself, Todd faces his thoughts and his anger alone, overwhelmed by the fear that he will never get out alive. The years in solitary confinement increase his frustration and despair. Get me out of here already. Taking advantage of the time, he writes letters to the outside world, proclaiming his innocence and describing his life behind bars. He even addresses Stacy, who has not visited him since his incarceration. After a long time, she finally reads his letter and decides to write to the governor, explaining Todd's innocence. However, this causes tensions with her grandmother. Todd continues to write to her, clinging to something tangible in a world that feels cold and relentless. In his letters, he evokes the life they shared, those moments of love and laughter that now seem so distant. While each month he watches as one of the prisoners receives the lethal injection. Let me walk. Why won't you let me walk, bitch? One day, a cellmate approaches him and offers a ray of hope. This prisoner mentions Todd about Texas Injustice, an organization that supports wrongly convicted people. If he writes to this entity and explains his situation, they might assign him a lawyer for his appeal. That night, he returns to his cell, determined to send another letter. He is assigned a new lawyer who provides him with books that might be useful and asks him to read the transcript of his trial, marking the facts that are false. This will be our last chance, and it's very small. A few weeks later, the prisoner who had befriended Todd receives his final notification, and they are not given time to say goodbye. You can, of course you can. While the prisoners awaiting their sentence say goodbye to those who have been condemned, 7 years pass until Elizabeth, a single mother with a strong sense of justice, hears about Todd's case and decides to write to him. Through letters, Todd shares his life behind bars and his frustration with Elizabeth, who finally decides to visit him. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Gilbert. It's a pleasure to meet you. A pleasure to meet you too, Cameron. From their first meeting, they both feel a connection. Todd begins to open up, showing a side of himself that others have not known. Through Elizabeth, he finds someone who believes in his innocence in a world that has judged him. Through Todd, Elizabeth discovers a cause that will consume her life, the fight to prove that justice has failed. They were the most beautiful babies in the whole world. I didn't kill my own daughters. Elizabeth gradually begins to visit him more frequently, and their conversations become deeper and more personal. They address their pasts, regrets, and the pain they both carry. Through their exchanges, Elizabeth begins to see Todd not as the man the world has condemned, but as someone who has been forgotten by a system that never gave him a chance. Quickly, 2 years pass, and Todd has matured emotionally and has read enough to leave his senseless violence behind. But he develops another strange behavior. Are you okay? Are you mad at me? Daniels, the head guard, catches him having imaginary conversations with his daughters. You know I didn't do it, right? In order to prove Todd's innocence, Elizabeth contacts fire experts and legal advocates, discovering that the original investigation had significant flaws, but the premise is the same. The fire does not lie. She then looks for Johnny, who was conveniently released after testifying against Todd, but he threatens to pull a gun on her if she doesn't leave him alone. Get out of here. Without hesitation, she appears on a radio station and exposes her belief in Todd's innocence, But he receives bad news. His date has been set for February 17th. February 17th. Elizabeth tries to convince Stacy to visit Todd and testify in his favor. However, Stacy refuses, influenced by her brother. A new fire expert reviews the case and concludes that the methods used in the original investigation were not valid and that the fire was undoubtedly an accident. If the person who installed the electrical wiring had knowledge of safety codes. Finally, Stacy visits Todd after years of separation, but the interaction does not go well. So many years of pent-up anger surface in seconds. 12 years for you to find the courage to come see me. Before he can implore her to defend him once more, Stacy refuses and leaves. Todd loses hope with only 5 days remaining until his execution. When they prepare to transfer him to the death chamber, Johnny sees his story on television and feels guilty, so he decides to write a letter, stating that he was pressured to testify against him by the district attorney and other authorities. And I was forced to testify against Mr. Willingham. However, the letter reaches the prosecutor, who is corrupt and does not plan to risk his position for Todd. With just 2 days before the execution, the media surrounds Stacy's house, awaiting her statement on the case. Her grandmother advises her to remain silent and let her brother speak. You let that monster pay for what he did. Todd asks Elizabeth if she will be by his side in his last moments. She promises him she will. However, while she tries to intercede with the governor, Todd anxiously awaits a call from her with less than 2 hours until his execution, but he is informed that no one has called. Elizabeth, although alive, arrives at the hospital with a broken neck, which makes it unlikely that she will walk again. Unfortunately, her neck is broken. We don't know if she will walk again. In the hospital bed, Elizabeth feels desolate for not being able to accompany Todd in his final moments. The guards lead him to the death chamber, and although he tries to cling to the floor to resist his transfer, he finally succumbs. Some people show up to accompany him in his last moments, including Stacy, but Todd is not comfortable with her presence and asks for her to be removed. The guard informs him that this is not possible, and Todd insults her one last time. In his last words, he again proclaims his innocence, stating that he has been condemned for an atrocious crime he did not commit. My last wish is for my body to be cremated and my ashes to be scattered over my daughters' graves. The film ends with Elizabeth reading Todd's last letter, who says goodbye and thanks her for her time and attention. He was a lost man, but she helped him find himself again. While we see Todd reunite with his daughters in the afterlife, despite Todd's death, Elizabeth never gave up, and in 2011, she managed to get the prosecutor and the Texas board to admit their error, reopening more than 158 cases of innocent people who had been judged by the same inefficient experts.